Greetings! Anton here with the H3VR Devlog. Hope folks are doing well this week. We've got a bunch of stuff to go over. So, what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about three categories of things. The first is the UGS system that I have been working on. The second one is an exciting trip I'm going to be taking this weekend that's relevant to the game. And the third relates to some frequent questions I've been getting about model donation. So let's go ahead and jump into things. So for the user-generated scenario system that I've been working on, it's sort of been consuming all of my energy and time. I'm hoping to have a whole bunch of new stuff for you folks to play with next Friday, including a couple new tools that are in serious need of some shakedown testing, as well as a new template environment or two. But in terms of what I'm going to be spending my time on for pretty much the rest of this calendar year, so about 5.5, 6 weeks, is going to be getting I would call the essential core of the UGS entities up and running for you folks to play with. I'm going to be focusing on, I would say, functional elements over decorative elements for this set, despite the fact that, where I come from first is an environment artist, so of course my inclination is just to make a whole bunch of pretty things for everyone to place. I know that the purpose of the system in a major way, and it's why I called it the user-generated scenario system, is for you to be able to create spaces where things happen that you want to happen. So with that in mind, what I'm building towards as fast as possible is basically a wiring and sequencing system composed of objects. If you've ever played Minecraft and played around with redstone, it takes some inspiration from that, but with a slightly different focus in terms of trying to make that more accessible while still making it as powerful as a generalized wiring system can be, and having a lot more inputs, outputs, sensors, that sorts of things. So the whole concept of this is so that, say, let's imagine a specific example. Let's say you wanted to make a specific 3-gun sequence with sort of like 3 stations, targets that activated when you arrived at that station, possibly having to be struck in a certain order, and wanted to be able to score the player with some sort of aggregate of time and total points. The way this system should function is you should be able to set up those targets, assign zones, and associate them, possibly make it so that those targets can only be struck by a certain class of firearm. So you can't, say, hit them all with your rifle. And that when each of those targets are struck, the amount of points that they represent will be sort of fed towards a final sort of scoring device. And you should be able to lay that all out in edit mode. That's what I'm thinking, in its simplest incarnation. So yeah. In addition to that, I hope to have another. I'm hoping by the end of the year to have probably 5 template scenes to begin with. They'll probably be on the simpler end, but just to give you folks some aesthetic variation. There's going to be one that's like the one that exists currently in game, but not crappy, in that it's very much a blank canvas for the most part, but should look a little more stylish. Those of you who've seen, I posted to the H3 subreddit this week a couple shots of a sort of bright, colorful, sci-fi-ish sort of space. Yeah, and I've got a couple more ideas. I'll talk about those more as soon as I've figured out a couple other things with my pipeline. And then in terms of the sort of entity packs that I'm sort of going to be aiming at to start with, are, as I mentioned, logic gates for the wiring and all the sort of base components that make sense for wiring, like signal splitters, etc. Targets of various kinds, so your classic sort of steel poppers, except that they'll actually output a signal into the wiring system if you want them to. Some IPSC stuff, some more destructible targets just for fun. Intelligent inputs for said system, so buttons, switches, etc. So especially if you want to have something set up for really precise timing and scoring for a sequence. I'll probably also have a gunshot sensor as well. So if you want the sequence to begin with the first shot that the player makes, like a reactive shot clock, that'll be in there as well. Base scoring systems, so ability to accrue points and possibly subtract them based on some sort of time that the user has, or have a final score purely in terms of time, is also going to be built, and some text panels for instructions. That's what I bet that's sort of round one of the entities that I want to get working. And I'm not going to basically do any sort of other fancy decorative stuff until that core is in, because I think it'll be possible to do a lot of stuff with just that. But then beyond those, and this is something that all of you can do to participate in this process, is when you're trying to build a sort of a user-generated, content system, there's the set of stuff that, I'm likely to think of because it's the kind of stuff I'm interested in making. But I'd really love to know what you folks out in the community would really like to see, with a real emphasis, as I said, not on decoration, but on functional elements. So if there's scenarios that you can imagine wanting to construct that are, between sort of target challenges to breaching challenges to agent challenges, if there's sort of subcomponents or atoms that you'd be like, oh, it'd be really neat to have a sensor that could detect X, or a device that does X when this thing happens, please jump right down to the Reddit thread that I've posted with this video and leave a comment. Feel free to type long form. I prefer it on Reddit instead of the YouTube comments, just because the YouTube comment system is terrible and it's impossible to keep track of everything. It's so much easier to see it in a more conversation form. So yeah, but if you can just feel free to just brain spasm it out. I would love that at this stage in development, the wider of a notion that I have about what folks would like to see with that system, the better I can plan the architecture that I'm building for all of it. Whew, so that's topic one down. Topic two is I'm taking an awesome trip this weekend, which is I'm going back to Battlefield Vegas. And one of the reasons I'm going back is that there is a set of firearms that I have mentioned will occur be added into the game sometime in 2017 that I have basically fired none of. And need to, because they're older, so they're more idiosyncratic, which is World War II firearms. I've got a whole bunch of models ready to implement. That I don't know exactly when I'm going to be staging my World War II firearm update, or the first one. Mainly because there's some system update stuff that has to happen first, including a engine version migration. But I'm just getting this out of the way now because I have to be in Vegas for other reasons. So I've got quite the laundry list, and so I'm not going to dump the video that I'm going to shoot there all at once. It's going to be appropriately sort of with the when the actual firearm gets implemented. And beyond the World War II stuff, there's also a couple other things. A bunch of folks have been like, "Can we please have a bullpup rifle?" And I've avoided it honestly because I've never fired one. I have no idea what the sort of the mechanics of how they feel to reload, and wanted to experience that beforehand. So I'm going to be firing an AUG, an L86, and probably an F2000 just to see how those all feel. I'm tremendously excited about it. Also going to fire a Barrett Light 50 because you just gotta. So that's going to be a hoot. And then let's see here. Our third topic relates to model donation. As I mentioned before, I believe in the QA and in several places on the Steam community, H3 is never going to have a generic Steam workshop like mod hot loading system. And part of that just has to do with the way that Unity's asset pipeline works. Part of it has to do with the way my asset pipeline works and how complex firearm objects are in terms of how they're set up. And also because I just don't want to deal with, if you make a game where people can just inject models, a tremendous percentage of those models are just going to be stolen from somewhere, and that's just a headache that I don't have the resources, time, or interest to deal with. And so, but if you're the sort who makes various 3D things and would like to donate a model to the project to have implemented into it, most especially a firearm or sort of related weapon, I have a set of sort of constraints that need to be adhered to if there's a model you have that you'd like me to take a look at. So I'm going to go over them here quick. So sort of two categories of concerns for them, which is how they're modeled and how they're textured. In terms of how they're modeled, and this is something that I have to stick really firm to, because I might have mentioned in a devlog, I basically own every firearm model that is available for purchase from any marketplace online that is PBR textured and looks halfway decent in its sort of preview images. And like 90% of them are not usable. And they're not usable for a bunch of sort of common infuriating reasons. Either there's missing detail on the interiors of them, like the magazine well is just, there's no geo in there, or you pull back the bolt and there's no geo at all inside the rifle, or more commonly, things are just not measured right, because that sort of thing doesn't matter a whole ton when it's just, a first-person shooter gun down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. But in VR, it especially in a unified system like this, like all the dimensions have to be right because the cartridges have to fit in the firearm. And so first and foremost, the dimensions need to be correct for a firearm model that's being donated. Please proof them ahead of time. I will just outright, reject any model where that is messed up. Units should be in centimeters in the actual model file. Everything that moves and is sort of visible in the common operation of the firearm should be represented. If it moves, it should be a separate mesh piece. No rigging necessary. I don't use boning or skinning for any of the firearm models. They're just separate subcomponent meshes. What else? Poly counts for them should be somewhere in the universe between like 6,000 and like 30,000 or so. One thing that is rather important about making VR content is the fact that vertexes are cheap relative to other things. It's more important, especially because we're looking at a model in stereo, for the topology of it to be correct. And to not just try to do bake downs of really wide bevels and things like that, because they just look really fake. So yeah, models should be centered in the scene, pointing down Z forward. All models, and this is super critical, need to have real vertex normal information, not smoothing groups. This is one of those types of things. I'm not a 3ds Max user, so I don't know what button it is that one has to press, but half the time when someone has given me a model out of Max and I bring it into Maya, it has no vertex normals whatsoever. Just everything is faceted, and then half the time it's correct. So I imagine it's some modifier that needs to be applied that sort of saves that down into correct. So and obviously the model needs to be in FBX format and only in FBX format. Clean silhouette, efficient, efficiently modeled but accurate. No unneeded, like, don't over bevel everything like crazy on the low poly model. If you're looking for if you're looking at firearms that are already in H3 and are like, what are some of the exemplars? I'd say one of the ones that I just adore, because it's an example of how to handle a really complex one, is the M107A1. That has a lot of plates in it that actually have holes in it. There's a lot of silhouette information in that model, but it's still represented really, really efficiently, because everything, all the sort of like micro bevels on components are in the normal map, and it's just been baked down perfectly. And then in terms of texturing for the models, metal rough style PBR, so that means base color, normal map, OpenGL style. metallic, occlusion, roughness as separate texture files. Please don't pre-combine them in the Unity way, where like the metallic and the roughness are in the same map. I'm not using Unity default shaders, and so I don't want or need my textures in the form that they use them. If you give them to me that way, I'll have to tear them apart anyway. At least 2K by 2K texture sets. Just, you know, it's fairly obvious whether it's enough information or not for stuff. Text on farms shouldn't look like a blurry, artifacted mess. The occlusion, here's number 3 reason why Anton has to throw away so many guns that he has bought on these marketplaces, is you would be, especially on Turbo Squid, the number of firearm models that occlusion has been baked for the model. Even for models where there's like interior detail, but the occlusion wasn't baked with the model exploded. And so if you move a piece back, it's just black. And it's infuriating. So yeah, and obviously making sure that you're using the correct tangent basis when baking your normal map. And this is less of an issue than it was a couple years ago. Substance Designer is going to do this correctly. X-Normal is going to do it correctly, because we're all basically in mixed space at this point. But just like, I would just put this under like, do you know how to bake normals down for the model correctly? If so, the model will be useful to me. If not, it's not gonna. And don't put a bunch of unnecessary high-frequency noise in the normal map. I've dealt with this a couple times, where someone will do like, it'll be like a super subtly bumpy plastic, but all that bumpiness will be in the normal map. That looks like crap, especially in VR. It just artifacts really badly because of the topological contrast. That type of information is always better represented in a roughness map than in a normal map. So yeah, and so that's the sort of constraints for firearms. If there's other stuff that you got lying around on your hard drive that sort of loosely follows those constraints, but because it's not a firearm, you're not quite sure whether it would work or be useful, or if it's efficient enough, etc. Like props, things that would be for entity sets, leveled geo kits, robot agents or whatever, pieces of fruit, what have you. Just get in contact with me directly on Reddit with some screenshots and wires of the asset, and I'll tell you if I can use it or not. And just make sure if you are donating something that you just include with it a statement that you're granting a non-exclusive perpetual license for the usage of it. A couple folks have given me assets and they're like, here, you own it now. And I'm like, you don't need to do that. Just grant me a license for its usage. If you still want to sell it on any other marketplace, use it in your own things, please feel free. I'm just happy to be able to use it. So yeah, so that's the details on asset donation. Man, it's been a long day. This entity manipulator I'm working on for the UGS system is hell when you're trying to make one tool that can do everything like movement, rotation, duplication, destroying things. It's hard, but it'll be ready for Friday, I promise. So, well, yeah. Well, I will stop rambling for now. This has gone on for more than long enough, and I hope you folks have a wonderful week. I'll be back next week with some new toys, a new firearm that I will be firing this weekend. Will be in the game on Friday. It's a popular request, and yeah, and have some cool stories from my pyrotechnic adventure. So I hope you all have a great week. And I'll talk to you soon. Peace.